First of all, welcome to all the people that registered and are in attendance. And if you have colleagues and people that you work with that are unable to attend, you're more than welcome after this to share the content of what we're going to talk about today. I hope you're all keeping safe in an increasingly chaotic world right now, and I hope you enjoy talking about something a little bit more technical and marketing research focused, in the midst of everything else happening in the world. Today we're going to talk about brand tracking and a little bit on how, as an industry, brand tracking has been around for decades, how we can evolve it, how we can make it better, and the main point that we'll be talking about and giving examples and demonstrations of is about connected data and how research as an industry is evolving and how we can sort of use that evolution of data and analytics in everything we do related to this topic. First, I'll just welcome everybody. To give you perspective, we had people sign up for this webinar across a diverse set of industries and brands. And so the examples that we're going to be using will come from a few of these different industries and different categories. So thank you guys for joining. Before we jump into the material, just a quick introduction to the presenters. My name is Evan Williams. I'm a Director of Client Experience at YouGov. Recently joined here, and before I was at YouGov, I spent most of my career in research and analytics, actually on the client side as a buyer of research, also as a leader of research groups and trying to develop some of the younger people on our teams. And this spanned across technology and FMCG, some companies you would see there, some were startups, big and small. Spent a number of years working out of Singapore and Japan, and now living and working in Vancouver. So a lot of my perspectives and the narrative that you'll hear coming from me is centered around some of the experiences I had as a client and some of the things I hear within that peer group and what they find valuable and what they are concerned about as it relates to getting the right insight and the right ROI from research. Jack?
Hi, Evan. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Jack Weber. I saw the original sign-up list, and I think I know a few of you. So if you're on there, hi again. And if I don't know you, welcome to the webinar. Yeah, I've been doing custom research a long time. I also started on the client side, I guess I'd say. In fact, Evan and I share a company, General Mills, although we weren't there together. But I've actually been on the supplier side of research for the last 20 years, almost all of that YouGov. And across that, I've had a lot of experience in, you can see some of the categories down there from food and beverage to financial services. And over the years, I've done many, many studies that involve brand equity and brand tracking, which we're going to talk about today. So, and you'll see, as being head of US Custom, you'll see why it's important that I'm on this call too, because we're going to talk a lot about how we can marry some of the custom work we do with some syndicated work, and it's really a kind of a cool way to think about trackers going forward. So Evan, back to you.
Great, thank you. I know the comment was in the chat box, but I'll just say it as well for everyone. All the material, both the presentation as well as the recording, will be available after the session. If you have questions of any kind, please put them into the chat box. We'll talk for about 40 to 45 minutes. And then we'll get to the questions and try to answer those as best we can. This isn't a presentation about YouGov. This is a presentation about connected trackers. This is a presentation about methodology and ideas. But we will be showing those examples, obviously, through what we have access to, which is our tools and our capability and our data. Just for those of you, I know some of you would be less familiar probably with YouGov overall. I'll talk maybe just for a minute about who our company is, but I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time about YouGov. For those of you that are less familiar with YouGov, we are a data and analytics company. We focus on collecting consumer opinion and behavior across the globe. We do this primarily through a very large panel that we manage. The company has been doing this for quite a few years now. We have 11 years of trended, historical, consistent data across brands, industries, categories, et cetera, and then across the globe. It's a unique data set. We call it, the cube in terms of where the data set goes. And all of this information that we collect on people, we then put into tools like brand tracking and profiling information and a variety of other things. If you want more information on YouGov following this presentation, we can give you a more elaborated explanation of what our company does. Our company we're good at research. We have been quoted as having very high data quality, so I won't talk a lot about data quality specifically today. We can talk about that another day, but just know that the data that we use and the quality of the data that we have a very high standard, and we have a whole army of professionals focused on that data quality. A lot of our products, just very quickly for those of you again that are not familiar, we have everything towards the top of this, from syndicated brand tracking to completely customized brand tracking, profiling information. We have a lot of fun working with sports teams. I know some sports teams are on this webinar today as well, so I don't want to forget about you guys, and a whole bunch of other stuff, DIY platforms so you can create your own surveys, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a suite, and the most important thing is just all of this goes into one integrated panel of 9 million participants, and we'll look at some of the examples through the lens of that today. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about YouGov. Let's jump into the material. 3 goals for today. The first one is to talk a little bit about some of the common challenges with conventional brand tracking. Again, some of this from my own experiences, but most of it coming from industry practitioners, peers, leaders, people that I've been around and we've listened to and talked to over the years, and how they talk about challenges with conventional brand tracking. Secondly, we want to talk about how to build organizational value from your brand tracking. This is always a big one. Brand tracking can be one of the most expensive line items that in a client's budget. And so getting value and getting a high yield from that data is very important. And third, we'll try to take this from conceptual level down to practical examples and demonstrations. So I thought it would be fun to start with just kind of a day in the life example of what people might typically go through as they're managing their brand tracker before we jump in. So we'll spend just a couple minutes on this fictitious brand that we call the Bean Machine. And typical kind of I suppose process that people would go to would start with something like this. Back up maybe a year ago from now. You're doing a brand tracker, you brought in all the vendors, you reviewed all of their proposals, and congratulations, you've selected one, you've chosen one, you feel confident, and you meet later with the team to review and finalize and say, okay, we feel good as a research team, let's bring this to management. So you bring that to management, you meet with your executive team, you draw it up, and they say, this looks good. Maybe a couple comments, they would say, well, focus on this or that, maybe the consumer funnel, or make sure you get brand associations, or in some circles brand love, in some circles not brand love. Make sure that you're measuring our marketing, make sure that we're assessing the value we're getting out of our marketing, both from short-term sales, which wouldn't be this, and then maybe to the brand overall and to the longer-term brand equity effect, through brand tracking. Make sure you limit those things. We want it to correlate. We want to make sure it lines up with our other data. And they say, then go and prosper. So you get through that. It's the end of May. You jump in a week later. You sign the deal, 7-figure global brand tracking across all of your major markets across the globe for your entire portfolio. And you feel good and you put the stamp of approval on it. Okay, so where do things go from there? Maybe a month goes by. And now you've got momentum. You've completed your questionnaire. You've put that questionnaire back to management in version 25, version 26, version 27 of a Word document. Painful as it was, you feel like you achieved what you wanted. You have your instrument, and the survey feels perfect, and you feel great. And here we go. Fast forward 3 or 4 months. This is where things maybe aren't so good. The tracker may be off to a rocky start. It's cumbersome. You have a lot of markets. You have a lot of different category frames. Everything that seems so easy might be a little bit difficult at this point. And then you're starting to get the first few waves of results. And these are coming to you sometimes in Excel, which is a terrible tool to try to analyze survey data to begin with. Maybe you're getting 100-page PowerPoints and you're going, what's the truth? Time is going by. Management team is saying, it's okay. First report was all right. Status quo, quietly underwhelmed, but nonetheless, you continue to work on this. Okay, so that goes on for a few months, and then March happens. This is what we've heard from a lot of people in the industry. COVID crisis occurs, and all of a sudden the tracker, which was perfect just a few months ago, is now obsolete, or well, maybe not obsolete, but it's less relevant, certainly, as it doesn't capture the dynamics of what is happening in the world today. And so you're asked to cut the budget. You're asked to cut the budget across a lot of your different research. And this obviously gets a lens on it, because this one has more zeros behind it than, say, an ad hoc quick study that you've done, which has fewer zeros behind it. And so people don't notice it as much. Finance is on your back, and procurement, and you feel this pressure and to kind of figure out and to do something. So this is kind of where we enter the conversation on how do we get more value. Well, brand tracking, I would argue, is as relevant or more relevant than ever. Brands are going through this crisis. They want to come out of this crisis with a better reputation maybe than they've had in the past. They want to set themselves up for long-term growth when the economy recovers and when the situation stabilizes. But how we track that change and how we do brand tracking, this is something that certainly can evolve, and that's what we're going to talk about. Here are some of the things that I guess I've said over the years, and I've also heard over the years, related to the things that clients will say about brand tracking, and we're going to address them today. The first one is the data doesn't move that much. Typically, brand tracking can move slower, certainly slower than short-term sales, right? You put a price discount in a grocery store, you will see lift, and then that lift will disappear when you take the sale down. But usually, or at least one of the common ways suppliers address this, the data doesn't move, is to, I call it like you're dressing up your data. You deliver fancy or better reports to make uninteresting data look better. It's not any better data, you just make it look fancy, lipstick on a pig kind of thing. There's other ways to do this. Instead of just saying, well, let's dress it up, building better systems that give you KPIs that don't just look at that surface level that doesn't seem to move, but allow you to very quickly go through a process to peel back the onion and look beyond those aggregated numbers and do it in an easy way, is sort of a different approach to thinking about brand tracking than maybe what has been done in the past. Obviously, most suppliers aren't going to claim they do some of these things, but nonetheless, it often looks like that to their buyers. This one is common. It's not, I don't use it that often, I don't really need it that often, so I'll just do some waves, cut my budget. And so one of the supplier responses is, well, it is what it is. If it's not regularly needed, let's just make this thing super bare bones, price the whole thing cheap, minimalist approach. And that saves you money, but it doesn't add more insight, doing it that way. And so in this case, we would say, well, what are the things that you regularly need? Most research departments have a regular research agenda of ad hoc stuff, some strategic stuff, some tactical stuff, whether that's UNAs or segmentations or product iteration or marketing iteration. How do you boost what you do regularly? And brand tracking allows you to do that. It integrates with trending events. It integrates with your other information that you're doing in a customized level. Longitudinal part of brand tracking is icing on the cake. Obviously, you can see how things happen over time, but we get out of this mode of thinking, I don't use it that often, because if this is the message that you send through your organization, I don't use it that often, then it's really not a very high ROI activity. And so we would, say, well, there's different ways to think about making it a more regular part of your research agenda. Thirdly, I don't know what to look at. Okay, so here comes the volume of that 100-page presentation. And well, well, this is one way to do it. You just say, well, you know what, if you don't know what to look for, I'll tell you what to look for. I'll bring in maybe an expert on the industry who shows up when they sell you it and then they disappear. They very much say, don't worry about what you know, I know a lot and I'll tell you. Or maybe the system is created in a way, if they have technology, to dictate that path to you. Or maybe they'll just increase the analysis. More and more in the world, the trend is for people to become more data literate. If you were to compare even, say, a brand marketer's remit 10 years ago to now, the need to be data driven is really changing significantly, and obviously with marketing science becoming popularized more than ever. And I think what that allows is, well, one of the beliefs that we would have, and maybe as an industry, but certainly at YouGov we have this belief, is that tools and technology should enable your team to find the truth. You should have less reliance on suppliers over time to do work that requires a lot of heavy consulting fees and extra money you have to pay. Trust in your team. Use tools and technology that are enablers for you, not just people, but systems. So let's look at this stuff, how we can reinvent brand tracking to be more useful, connected, and evolved. I'm going to start with just a basic framework to think about this. The first one is, how do you maximize value? We'll talk about it in 3 dimensions: flexibility, scalability, and connected. Flexibility is the ability to adapt to things as they're coming into the market. Flexibility, the ability to, scalability, the ability to share what you're doing with your coworkers across industries, across your teams, across local markets, global teams, and being able to do that in much the same way you imagine sharing content in your personal life. You hit the share button, it says which channel, you hit that, and instantly sharing. That's how it should feel to share. It should not be transmission of overly complex, hard to read Excel or PowerPoint decks alone. And then lastly, connected. And I talked a lot about this already, but the ability to connect to adjacent categories that maybe you don't get to see, other surveys, integrating with your company data to build the strategic use of this over time. The limitations in the past were, well, how am I going to do this if I have a 15-minute survey length? And we'll address that. Because the reality is you don't want to change that instrument all the time because you jeopardize the trendability of it. So flexibility, we're going to look at this. Again, like I said, this is about being able to adapt to daily issues, new trends, and hot topics. So we'll look at this through the lens of COVID-19, which is an obvious, very big topic in the world. It's dominating most of our conversations until maybe the last week, and now other things are coming in into our frame. But this has been the narrative for the last few months. So what are we learning relative to conventional brand trackings, that would have to do separate research? Well, so let's start with an example. This is just an example of something that you'd see in a standard tracker. So this is DoorDash, which delivers food, if you're unfamiliar with that brand. And we're just looking at the consideration during earlier weeks of COVID and then, going on throughout April. If you look at this, you'll see that, yep, they've seen a good consideration increase. And then it's kind of plateaued a little bit starting in mid-April. And you'd look at this and you would say, okay, so I assume this is from COVID, but what if you actually had COVID data that you just integrated? So what we've done, this is just an example, we've taken 2 separate survey instruments that people answered. One was the brand tracking, like I just showed you, would you consider using DoorDash in the future? And then a separate COVID study where we were asking people how they're feeling about COVID. And specifically here, what we were asking them was, how concerned are you of contracting the COVID virus? And we had a 4-point scale. Fearful is, I'm very afraid, I'm kind of afraid. Not fearful on this chart is not too afraid, or I'm not afraid at all. And then we were trying to understand, well, like, what's going on here? Is DoorDash's consideration due in any part to levels of COVID fear? And we see that in fact, people that are claiming to have a heightened level of fear of contraction had an increase in their consideration. and people that didn't have a fear didn't have really much change. So in other words, at least part of what's going on with the DoorDash increase in consideration, which flowed into an increase in customer base and penetration, part of it is due to what's going on with COVID. So if I toggle here for a minute and see if I can efficiently do this. Here we go. This is an example of how you might have a system that does your tracking that would do that. So in this case, the gray line is depicting like what you would classically get in a brand tracker, which is here's your consideration changing over time. And maybe you're interested in a different metric. You could choose a different metric down here. I won't do it to save time today. But really what we're talking about is going in and being able to look at, in this case, we're looking at different audiences. And in this case, I went into it, like you could have custom questions. You could have, in our case, we have lots and lots of surveys that are profiling people every day. And you could say, well, I want to know what's, hot and a topic of today. And we could look at, what we're asking people in May about, certainly. So we get, this would have a lot of stuff related to COVID right now. And so then what we're trying to achieve doing here is integrating real information of what's going on in people's lives today without having to set up so many ad hoc extra surveys that cost extra money and take extra time. It's all just sitting there in one spot. So we do that. We pick our audiences, and then we have a flexible solution that allows us to look at, in purple, high levels of fear for contracting COVID, and red, very low levels. And then we get the average. So just an example of how we think about integrating, a couple of different pieces of information. Now, if you elaborate on this beyond just COVID, but if you elaborate this to think about where you want your data to be flexible and your tracker to be flexible, the purpose of this is to integrate information to answer multiple different business questions. So you could have a whole warehouse of information related. Obviously, demographics is popular, psychographics is popular, maybe some lifestyle questions and cultural questions, and then other stuff maybe on the left of this chart related to category diagnostics, specific things. And the ability to sort of integrate this can only happen if you have a single source panel that people are taking multiple different surveys that connect together. If you don't have a panel, this doesn't work. Okay, moving on. Go back here for a minute. Okay, so part of the reason some systems are flexible and others is not is because of this always-on data approach, right? So YouGov, we track every single day. We track what people are doing, and we ask them every single day. And so classically, as people have set up, I would describe them more as waves. Maybe it's like 4 waves a year. You miss out on all the daily nuance. Not only that, you might miss what's happening between those data points, but certainly traditional waves, they miss out on a lot of what's going on in the world. So that's an issue. Scalability, I'll talk a little bit about scalability now. This is tools and metrics that need to kind of acknowledge the diversity of geographies. I mentioned earlier I had worked a number of years in Singapore and a number of years in Japan. And I always felt, living and working in a local market, that the global team didn't listen to me. They had their KPIs and it was going to be very aggregated. And then I sitting on the ground would lose that local nuance that I cared so much about. Or the alternative is, well, you set them all up locally and then global teams have to aggregate some sort of KPI report that's littered with asterisks all over the pages trying to explain the difference between market A and B, or brand A and B, or category A and B. So these global models, as you would call them, global local, right? These accelerate growth because they allow both to happen at the same time, local and global. Local teams can go deep into the analysis. Global teams can report upward to the C-suite in a very easy to do. Okay, so when we think about this, scaling these things, this improves decision clarity, efficiency, and collaboration. One of the things working in a global role in the past that I always struggled with was, how do you get those consistent metrics? This is something someone asks you for, could be something that comes urgently. We need to know how the brand is performing across all of our markets. where are we winning, where are we losing, rank order, and do it, get me a report by the end of the day or the end of the week, or, even at the end of the week is a challenging thing for some people to do. So we try to aim for consistent metrics. And then, well, that doesn't mean you truncate your data. It also needs to go fast, and that's modern day tools, right? Visualization, dashboards, these types of things. That's like the new norm. That should be the new expectation in our industry, as well as obviously outside of the industry. There's really impressive tools out there like Tableau as well. Reducing overspends. This is where we start to think, well, if you can get to scale, and if you get to one place where you have everything warehoused, you can harmonize in a way that you don't overspend, you don't duplicate your efforts, and along the way you end up saving money. And then lastly, this relationship between local entities and global entities strengthens as they share, and it strengthens as everybody get what they want out of the platform. So I'll just do a quick shift and show you, this should be the new norm in our industry. Something that allows global and local at the same time should be the new norm across the board. It is not, but there are a lot of tools out there that can help people to modernize this. So I picked an example. Tesla's not a lot, but I thought it might be fun to look at Tesla data, listening to some of the stuff that Elon Musk talks about recently, and they shot a space rocket up the other day successfully. So anyways, inspired to look at Tesla a little bit. This is just a view of where we'd say, well, how is the impression of Tesla around the world very quickly, Australia, Spain, UK, France, US. Okay, and so this kind of gives you that global view. Moving to the right, you can kind of see, well, this is how it's performing relative to its peer group in the US on impressions. So right now, Tesla has a long ways to go. It's down here in red, has a long ways to go to catch up. And that's because you look at some of these brands like Toyota and Honda, they've been in the market forever. And so they have lots of customers, a lot of people have experience with them and know them. And despite the sexiness of Tesla, it's an elegant, great product, a lot of people still aren't there yet. So we have a little bit of local nuance. On the bottom, we see a little bit more trended nuance. And if you really wanted to get into the details, this is looking at the impression of Tesla over a long period of time in the US. If you really wanted to get into the nuance, you could go right back in and start thinking about your audiences. Maybe you want to look at some demographic stuff simply. Maybe you want to get really elaborate and look at what media they're using. So all of that becomes real. It becomes tangible, and it becomes a way to sort of very quickly merge the need to look at both your global and your local data at the same time. It's not just global to local, it also is large portfolios. I worked a number of years at both Mondelez and General Mills, and we're talking massive portfolios that span across categories and brands and whatnot. And so the ability to manage a portfolio is also something if you're only working in one market at a very large company. Okay, all of this is then enabled, obviously, survey analytics and visualization. Let's not use 100-page PowerPoints. Let's not use Excel even, which is not a great tool for survey data. Using something that actually is designed for survey data, drag, drop, go fast, visualize. What you're seeing on your screen here is our data visualization and survey data platform, which we call Crunch, but it's not just that's the only one there, but the idea is how do you get the ability to go faster than you've ever been able to go, but not losing data points and not losing comprehension of what's going on along that way. Last comment just on scale. For those of you that are managing large research budgets, maybe the illustration here would make sense and kind of be close to what you experience, but most research budgets have a number of line items. They all have a price tag associated with them. And when you add them all up at the end of the year, it becomes a very large sum of money. What I've seen, both experienced as a client before I joined over here, but in other jobs, is when you consolidate and when you connect things, you very quickly can glean and observe the efficiencies that you can gain from doing something like this. You stop doing duplicative work. You stop asking the same questions in multiple different surveys for no reason. It all sits in one place. So the last area we're going to talk about is connected. This one is really about, well, classically with a brand tracker, you are looking at your category, and maybe you don't have space to look at adjacencies. And certainly most brand trackers do not connect unless there's an ecosystem for it with other data, and in many cases, just not even with your own company data. So fundamentally, being able to connect the information is crucial. So between surveys and across categories. So Jack is going to take you through some examples of how you would connect different forms of the data and how you'd connect surveys across, you know, different surveys into one view and one insightful report or summary. So let me hand it over to Jack.
Great, thank you, Evan. Yeah, and I'll show you 3 examples. And the examples themselves might look fairly simple in how I describe them, but what's behind them is literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of data points in the connectivity that he talked about. So let's go through them one by one. The first one is an example. We major media conglomerate, a network you might want to say, had products across all channels, and they determined after speaking with us that they really needed a custom tracker. So a syndicated tracker just didn't work for them, and that's fine. That happens, obviously. So those of you who are running custom trackers, you understand what the value of those are. But obviously, you also know that many times the way these studies are priced, besides incidence and sample size, is length. And a lot of times what you want to do on these custom trackers is keep the study down, but you've got a lot of different groups, internal, external, that are asking you to add this, oh, I want to know about this now, I want to get more information. So the idea here was to run a custom tracker, and we can go to the next page, but add on a large database that was already pre-existing within our company that happens to be profiles. So Evan was showing you a few minutes ago some examples of some of those things that were in the profiles database, the hundreds and hundreds of measures that we've already collected from our respondents. So in this case, we can run a custom tracker, keep it at 15 or 20 minutes, get it the real information they need to know, but then integrate a large database. We called it the cube early on, but think of it as just, again, 100,000 different questions we've asked over time to these respondents, and that can help them in things like media habit deep dives, sub-product interactions, and so forth. And the next slide is a very simple example, but so on the side is a custom tracker. In that custom tracker, you might ask a few demographics just to make sure you have the right person in the household you want to talk to. So you might ask something like gender, you might even ask age in the study. But after that, really, if you've done this right, and if you have a database that's connected to these respondents in this panel, you don't have to ask a lot of the things that you can just get. For instance, this company used the profiles database to get at things like habits and practices of, you know, what other networks they're watching, what subcategories they're watching, whether it's weather, you know, homepage food, times of day they're watching. So again, it all comes down to survey real estate. And if you think about a custom tracker, why ask a 45-minute survey? And believe me, in my career, I've been asked to put together 45 and 50-minute surveys. Why ask a 45-minute survey when you can connect data to these respondents you've already got and cut this down to a nice, crisp 20-minute survey where you won't get, you know, respondent fatigue, but you'll get the benefit of all the information you need. So this is kind of maybe the simplest example of just, again, adding on a larger data set to a custom survey. The next example was a company, a telco company, who had an NPS tracker they were working with us on. But then, of course, they have their own segmentation, whether it was developed ahead of time. And as you know, if you've done segmentation, you can end up with sort of a smaller set. Some people call them a typing tool, the golden questions. They end up using an algorithm to type your respondents in a survey. Well, of course, that's something we like to help with. And so we can add, and on the next page, we can show you a couple examples. We can add the typing tool questions, the golden questions, certainly into any kind of custom survey, but we also added into our syndicated surveys, our brand index study. So in this example, the client had 6 segments, and knowing the questions we had to get at those 6 segments, again, these can be linked into a custom survey, obviously, but they can also be linked into an existing syndicated survey. And then you get the vast wealth of all the information in that syndicated survey, not just your brand, but your competitors, even competitors outside of your space. And you can look at your 6 segments across anything you want. In this case, they wanted to profile their 6 segments on habits, such as, the kind of, web chat store and so forth. But it really is, it speaks to, Evan mentioned sort of being scalable and flexible and connected. Well, all these examples are connected. This one's also a really good example of scalable, because what also can be done with something like this is we have the ability at least to go onto our panel and type people on the panel with your segments. So if we know what the 5 or 6 questions are, we can go to a sample of our panel, type those folks, and now, in this case, with this telecom company, we were able to offer them surveys going forward. Forget this survey for a minute. Future surveys, we could just go after segment 2 and segment 4, or segment 1 and segment 3. And that's where the scalability comes into play when you have a connected data set like this, and you have a large set of a large panel of respondents that are answering surveys all the time, not just your custom survey, but surveys on a variety of different topics. So that's where the scalability comes in. And the third example, we talked about connectivity. All these are connectivity and scalability. This one probably fits the flexibility issue as well as anyone that Evan mentioned. So think about your customers. We all have customers that stick around forever, the loyal ones. We have customers that lapse or they churn out. We have customers that switch back and forth. And many times in my career, I've been asked to do surveys, standalone surveys. Let's find people that told us that they used my brand a year ago, but now they're not really using my brand. So we can do that, and we've done that in the past before we had connected data set. But of course, we're going on memory. And memory is good to an extent, but memory's not great for a frequently. It's easy for an automobile. Yeah, I know. I owned a Ford a couple of years ago, and I own a Toyota now. Do I really know what kind of candy bar or bread I bought 9 months ago and what I'm buying now? Probably not. I can go on memory. So what we can do instead is use the ability of our always-on syndicated study. In this case, it's brand index. Then we'll go to the next page. And for instance, we know that people have answered surveys. Maybe they answered a survey 6 months ago, and that week they were asked what brand they bought. And now 6 months goes by and they answer another survey because it's part of our always-on syndicated platform. And they've answered for the same category again just this week. What brand are you buying now? Well, now we know exactly, are they a switcher? Have they lapsed away from your category? Are they a new brand user? We know that based on responses to a syndicated survey at different points in time. And so obviously right then we can capture them at that moment and start asking them reasons of why they switched, why they lapsed, why they became new. And on the next page you can see why that's so powerful. Again, a brand index tracking study or a syndicated study, always on, and maybe they answer questions in that category every 4 to 6 months. Once we see that something's changed, and we would set this up ahead of time, and we talk to a client, and a client would tell us, if you see somebody that's lapsed, or maybe you've seen somebody that's changed their rating. 6 months ago, they gave your brand a pretty good rating on quality. All of a sudden this month, they've dropped their quality rating. Gee, I wonder why that is. Well, let's find out. We can quickly go in and do a recontact, and that's the beauty of a design like this, and find out right then and there, hey, you just told us that you rated this brand an 8 on a scale of 10 on this metric, but 4 months ago you rated it a 4 as an example. What's changed? And the next page shows a quick example of that, and this happens to be in a QSR category, and there were 2 audiences we wanted to look at. The audience on the left had told us over 2 different time periods in 2 different surveys in our syndicated tracker, and in time period 1 they were a user of this brand, A, B, or C. We've taken the names off here, but in period 2 they weren't. So they are lapsed or churned respondents or brand users. So why is that? Well, in this case, you see what we see in a lot of lapse studies. It really is many times just based on inactivity or salience. So maybe they haven't heard about the brand in a while, they haven't seen an advertisement, they haven't gone by the store, they haven't come across that brand in whatever ways they can come across it. So this would tell the client that, they just haven't been getting their message out enough, as an example, for something like that. On the right-hand side, was a specific example of where we found folks that have literally changed their rating of a brand from positive in one survey to 3 months later, all of a sudden they have rated that brand negative. So immediately, like the next day, we could get into them with a recontact and say, hey, we just noticed that you did a survey. Can we ask you a few more questions? And your rating dropped. Well, here you can see we did this for 3 different brands. In this case, it was pretty specific. We got answers like food taste, the employee professional, and we got a lot of specifics here. This is the kind of thing we'd want to do an open-ended question, and we did. And we got responses like, well, you know, the chicken sandwich was drier. I didn't like the size of the hamburger. I think it used to be bigger 6 months ago, and so on. So these are great examples of sort of flexibility, I'd say, in the 3 things Evan talked about. Having the ability to be flexible on a brand tracker, and even though your main study isn't going to get at this, if you have the ability to jump in right away and do a deep dive, dig in on a recontact, there's really no better way to make a brand tracker relevant to you, to yourself and your management. And so this is sort of a fun subway map example. We kind of call it our subway map, that there's different ways to do tracking. You know, sometimes you're taking the express train. You've got a syndicated tracker. It's giving you all you need. It's wonderful. You're done. And you're ending up at your solution at the end. Now, you're using some of the tools Evan showed you, probably, or you should be using some of the tools Evan showed you, where you can dig into the data and you know, cut the data any way you want to. That's fine. But many times the express train doesn't work. And that's where some of the connectivity comes in. So even though you start with a syndicated tracker, as I mentioned, you may have stopping points along the way where you stop for a minute, look at some of those hundreds of thousands of variables in our cube. Other times you might stop and do a recontact study, like a custom study there, because you just noticed that a quality rating dropped. On the flip side, you may have a full custom study, but again, halfway through your journey in the year, you know, we really got to dig into this one group. Let's add on all the data variables we know that have been asked about this group already, whether it be you know, the DoorDash heavy users and DoorDash light users. So there's different ways to get the total solution. I guess our point is that there's no right one way, and sometimes you're on the express train and that's great, but many times you're going to be on the local, where you're going to stop and pause and dig into things and have that ability. Having that ability is really, really important, we think, in a tracking system. And so the next page is really just, I guess it's an example of some of the, we can go to the next one. It's just an example of some of the things that we've talked about a little bit. Again, we're not trying to hit you too hard with this, but we talked a little bit about, on top, YouGov brand index, which is our always on tracker in the top circle, and YouGov profiles, which is that database of over hundreds of thousands of variables that we can append on to a custom study, frankly, or a brand index study. We also have some other index products, football index, destination index, sports index, we're not going to go into now. But the key thing we wanted to get across here was that this big circle on the left is the recontact, because we think that's a really important way to add value to these syndicated trackers, right? To the ability to jump in when you need to and do quick recontacts based on what you're seeing in the data. And again, you might do that on the bottom with a custom study as well. You might have to jump in and do some recontacts or add on a database. That's fine. All of it leads to the idea that if you have a system that's integrated, and YouGov happens to have that, we think it makes for a much more valuable and meaningful brand tracker. And then, of course, you know, Evan took you through some of the tools that you can show, reporting tools. I think he spent some time on Crunch. But, you know, we also have dashboards. And, of course, you know, we can always export data in the API if needed as well. Evan, do you want to jump back and wrap it up?
Sure. Yeah, I like the examples that Jack provides, because he talks about both this world of custom and syndicated. And part of the evolution of the research industry is there's a lot of stuff out there that has gone, you know, like fully syndicated route, and then like there's a lot of traditional classical suppliers out there too that are still selling, you know, specifically custom only solutions. And I don't think that, you know, we should be thinking about these as one or the other anymore. I think that's false. I don't think that's the way data is configured anymore. In fact, more likely now, this idea of customization, making it relevant to your category or your brand and your competitive set is very important. And being able to go fast and have things where you can see, across larger scales, and having tools, whether that's reporting tools, that are actually modern, is very crucial. So, so in summary on this stuff, we'll just say very quick summary, and I'd encourage people, if you have questions, put them into the chat box, and we'll answer them in a few minutes if you have any. But the first thing is just that brand tracking must be modern. We're not talking about like cool and trendy. We're talking about high yield ROI, valuable, connected, putting things together. But often this is not what gets sold into our industry. We realize that. And so, I just wanted to, again, restate that solutions are there. There are companies that do this. YouGov is an innovator of this, and was sort of the first one to do syndicated brand tracking to some extent. It's been around a long time, but certainly there's things out there that can help you achieve your goals. The consequences of not modernizing right now are pretty severe. We talked about that at the beginning in the day of the life example, where, well, one consequence is your budget gets marginalized because it's not generating the kind of value it needs to generate, or your research agenda in general is not reaching the goals that it's supposed to have. Sometimes it leads also, if you're not modernizing these things, it leads to overspends. And so right now, with budgets getting pared back and slim, and have to be careful, like there's no wiggle room for that kind of duplication of effort. And then, not just about budgets, but like this guy's, I suppose, body language depicts the other consequence, which is you just spend way too much time doing tasks that are not adding value, whether that's aggregating PowerPoint decks or Excel charts or whatever that might be, trying to explain things that are all over the map. That's a problem. Adding more studies that you don't need to have, just like all those things that make us as individuals less efficient in the workplace. So we want to make sure that people are moving towards solutions, obviously, that make them more effective in their jobs. So the connected data, as we call it, this is a very practical solution to sort of upgrading brand tracking right now. And if you have any questions on any of this, obviously you can reach out to us. You can reach out to Jack or me directly. We, through the email address here. The materials, again, will be available to all of you. There's an attached white paper if you want a little bit more information on the technical detail behind how this works. And again, primarily focusing on thinking about our industry, not just at a company level for YouGov, but really what we're trying to contribute to innovating in the space of data and analytics at a broader scale. So thank you guys for your attention, and let's check if there's any questions, answer them, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, we have a question about, on average, how many times the same respondent asked about a brand in the course of the year. So I'm going to assume you're talking about something like the brand index survey, which is a longitudinal tracker. There's a lockout period, so we don't do that too often. The soonest they can get a brand again is 3 months. The average is about 5-6 months that they'll get a repeat of a category where a brand is in it. Okay. Evan, maybe the next one was talking about the global and local.
Yep.
Oh, how granular does your syndicated brand index option go? Can you get down to major cities? Yes, I mean, the sample size is large enough, and you can cut the data by DMAs and sometimes major cities. I mean, if you're doing major city, you'd probably have to do a rolling average over several weeks. I mean, you're not going to get a major city, within a few weeks, but absolutely you can get a major city over time because we're always on every night.
The thing I would add to it is, like it will vary a little bit market to market. The good news is we collect daily. Where you have a very small niche brand, I mean, this would be a challenge you'd have.
Yeah.
Regardless of how you approach your brand tracking. If you have a niche brand, it's hard to track at that level. You know, like just one example, but we like to look at our data first nationally because it's syndicated, and then we have the ability to look at regions. And I remember, and cities, and I remember back to the days when I used to spend time at Uber running research in Asia Pacific. You know, we didn't have national scale. Certainly there's a lot of products that don't have national scale. And so, you know, we wanted to just see things at a regional or a city level data. And I know that there's probably people on this call that experience this. They might not be like a Coca-Cola that has widespread distribution across an entire nation in every single spot. So there is that flexibility to think about how we cut the data within Brand Index to give us that sort of regional and city view, and that's a very common thing that we talk about. Where it's easier to do it, obviously, is the bigger the category, the bigger the brands, obviously, and the more, you know, like mid-size, fine, but the more niche you get, the harder it gets, you know, and to the point where completely niche brands, very difficult. But that's kind of the nature of research in general.
Mm-hmm. In the fast food example, what sample size did you have in the recontext? Yeah, so on the recontext, interesting part about that is the recontact rate, I'll start with, was very high. The response rate was about 85%. So meaning that when we identified the people we wanted to ask a recontact to, and that's because, recall, they had recently done a brand index survey, 85% of them came back on our recontact, which I think is quite good. And then we really had high sample sizes on 2 of the categories. For the folks that had lapsed for each brand, we got about at least 500, some 700 as much, because we took this over a 6-month time period. We also had a lot for the people that had quality rating changes, meaning in a 6-month time period, we could find for each brand about 700, 800. The one we did not find as many for, maybe understandably, was switching. So for switchers, it takes a longer for someone to actually leave a brand and start another brand. There we had about 100 sample size on some of the switcher. So switchers were less, a lot easier to find churn or lapsed, and or certainly new clients as well.
Let me answer the next one real quick. The idea of integrating recent trends with KPIs is a good one. What is the biggest insight that your analysis has revealed about customer attitudes and behaviors related to COVID? Well, it's a very good question. There's 2 things that I would, you know, we've been observing COVID. We've been tracking COVID since the very beginning. We have syndicated trackers related to that, but probably the biggest thing we saw right at the beginning of COVID was this, because we were looking at it globally, this deep lack of compliance to what the government was telling people to do and to the behaviors that people needed to exhibit in order to slow down or flatten the curve, as they call it. But we saw this real disconnect in what was being told and what people were actually doing. Okay, so that's kind of normal. We, you know, like everyone was, you know, talking about that, and that's why the U.S. has one of the higher, I suppose, transmission rates per capita in the world, although, you know, testing, we could debate that. But we certainly saw that there was a lack of compliance. But what was interesting about that lack of compliance that I saw is when we looked at genders and ages and demographics and psychographics, all of these things are a little bit higher and a little bit lower. But the real profound difference in the way people looked and behaved was a variable that we collect related to their political beliefs. And I'm not going to take sides at all. It's just that people of different political beliefs consume different media, and the consumption of that different media channel or news source gives them different views of what's going on in the world. And so you'd see these huge disparities between one group and another group on political affiliations and how they viewed COVID and how they reacted to what they used, and how their outlook on the economy, their outlook on how the government was handling the situation. And this gap, this major gap between the way people view reality and what's happening, is what makes us in totality not able to get moving and mobilize as quickly as, say, countries that don't have as much political discourse. So we saw that happening in real time in our data. And with those kinds of insights, we were then connecting that back into brands, looking at where brands were in the US specifically, where they were skewed. If they were very skewed towards big cities, their big communities of users would come from certain political backgrounds in proportion. And so we were seeing how this plays out. But from a marketing perspective, understanding this is important because we're essentially talking to two different audiences right now. So I know we only have a few minutes, so I won't keep going on that. If you want more, Niraj, if you want more information on COVID, we can talk about that offline, and we can go even deeper into it. Would love to do that.
I can respond to the next one. How much can your clients rely on their YouGov service team to proactively identify deep dives? So it's really interesting. Our service teams love to do this. I guess I'd say they are ready and willing to help with this, but every client we work with is a little bit different. Some clients, it's a real partnership and we want it, and we talk about this. Hey, what about this idea? Let's go down to here. And many times we'll need to know what your issues are to do that. But again, we're always ready to do it. But I'll be honest, some clients are, I'll call them data geeks in an endearing way, that just do it themselves and are just digging into the data and they're playing with Crunch, and that's what they want to do. So it's across the board, but I guess I'd say that our service team, this is the fun stuff, right? I mean, our service team, if they weren't doing this, they'd just be setting up, data sets for people. So the fun part of their job is to actually identify deep dives and drill down. So they're ready and willing to do that anytime, I guess. And we do it a lot. It's just every client's a little different of what they're looking for. Is probably the best way to say.
I would add on to Jack's comment about that. It's a different mentality when it is the information flows from one person directed, like you're just the consumer of something that's finalized, which is fine. We can do that. But I like to think about things as far more collaborative, where the speed of the discovery process can be very fast and can be shared. So you can go deep. Certainly our people like going deep into issues because we have the analytical tools that make data fun. If you think data is fun, it's fun if you have the right tools. But I find like the trend now is a lot more of this collaborative, like, let's look at these things, here it is, very quickly adapt it. Imagine like Minority Report, if some of you aren't too young to remember that, but very much looking at it in real time together, collectively, getting to the point, and then going forward. But for some people that just want that classic, like, just tell me what you have in the data and send me the report, that's also like easy because we can go fast with what we have. That's a YouGov thing. I don't know if that's all companies, but that's probably our position on it. Okay, we have 30 seconds, so just long enough before we get cut off to say thank you for everybody. I hope that it was refreshing to hear about a topic that isn't so chaotic in the world. And if you have any questions related to connected data sets and connected trackers, feel free to reach out to us. We're here. We'd love to dialogue with you more about it. Have a great day.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Bye.